Imagine waking up in the middle of the night, the kind of night where even the air feels heavy. Your room is still, the shadows stretched across the walls like they're alive. You reach for your phone, but it's dead. No glow, no time, nothing. Then you hear it, the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling your bed. But here's the part that should terrify you the most. You live alone. Stories like these are not just whispers from folklore or tales invented to frighten children. They are real accounts, true stories, incidents that were documented, investigated, and, in many cases, never explained. Ordinary people just like you faced something that defied reason, something they could never escape from. Tonight, we are going to uncover two of these stories, cases that challenge the very idea of safety, cases that will make you question what you know about the world around you. They are not myths. They are not legends. They happened. And once you hear them, you may never feel truly alone again. This is the first story. Story 1. The house no one should enter. Narrator. On the edge of a forgotten town stood a house no one wanted to talk about. It wasn't abandoned because it was old or because it was falling apart. No, the reason was much darker. People said the house had a memory, that it remembered everyone who stepped inside, and it never let them leave the same. The house was avoided for decades. Neighbors would cross the street rather than walk past it. Children dared each other to get close, but even the bravest refused to touch its doors. At night, lights flickered in its broken windows. Shadows moved across the curtains. And if you stood still long enough, some swore you could hear a woman's voice calling faintly from inside, even though the house was locked and empty. This wasn't just folklore. In 1968, it belonged to the Lawrence family, a couple and their 2 daughters. 6 months after moving in, all 4 of them were dead. Police ruled it a murder-suicide, but their reports made little sense. The windows had been locked from the inside, the doors barricaded. And yet, after the funerals, neighbors swore they still saw someone walking in the upstairs hallway. No explanation was ever given. For years, the house sat untouched, until 2003, when Daniel and Rebecca Carter bought it. They didn't believe in curses. They didn't listen to warnings. To them, it was a cheap fixer-upper, a chance to build a new life together. But from the very first night, they realized they had made a mistake. Rebecca woke to a faint knocking sound. At first, she thought it was the wind. But when she turned toward the noise, she saw it was coming from the bedroom mirror. Slow, deliberate taps from the other side of the glass. Daniel laughed it off, but that night, when the lights went out, the knocking returned. 3 sharp raps, silence, then 3 more. Over the next few nights, the house grew louder. Doors swung open on their own. Light bulbs flickered until they burst. Whispers drifted through the air vents. Low voices repeating words too muffled to understand. And every morning, Rebecca found deep scratches carved into the wooden floorboards beside her bed, as if something had been crawling toward her while she slept. One night, Daniel woke to the sound of running water. He walked into the bathroom and found the faucet turned on full. As he reached to turn it off, he noticed the mirror above the sink was fogged, except for one small clear spot. In that spot was a reflection that wasn't his. A pale face, hollow-eyed, with a mouth stretched far too wide. He spun around. The hallway behind him was empty. When he looked back, the mirror was cracked. From that night on, Daniel avoided the mirrors. But the more he avoided them, the more he began to see movement in the corners of his eyes. A shadow pacing the hallway, a figure standing at the foot of the bed. Always watching, never close enough to confront, but never gone. The house wasn't only watching them, it was surrounding them. Rebecca, meanwhile, began to change. Daniel would wake to find her wandering through the halls in the middle of the night, whispering softly to someone who wasn't there. When he shook her awake, she never remembered. Her skin grew pale, her eyes sunken. She started speaking about the house as though it were alive, as though it wanted them to stay forever. Her behavior worsened. Friends who visited said she looked sick, unstable. And then one morning, she was found wandering barefoot down the street at dawn. Her nightgown soaked in blood, her hands trembling. When neighbors rushed to help, she said the same thing over and over again. It wanted us to stay. Daniel was never seen again. His car sat in the driveway. His wallet and keys were on the counter. There was no forced entry, no blood, no sign of a struggle. He had simply vanished. The police investigation uncovered chilling evidence. Every mirror in the house was shattered, but not from the outside. The glass had broken outward, as though something had forced its way through. Deep claw marks were found on the walls and floors. And in the attic, investigators discovered a pile of crude sketches. Drawings of figures standing over a bed, their faces blank, their hands stretched forward. No one could explain who drew them. Rebecca was hospitalized. Doctors said her memory was fractured, her mind unable to process what had happened. She never returned to the house. She never spoke of Daniel again. The property remains boarded and untouched. Neighbors still refuse to go near it. And yet, late at night, some claim to see faint movement behind the curtains. Others swear that if you stand close enough to the front steps, you can hear the sound of slow, steady breathing from inside. Narrator: the house remembers, and it is still waiting. Story 2: The Disappearance That Shouldn't Exist. In missing persons cases, there are always clues. A footprint, a witness, a last phone call, something that can be pieced together to form a trail. But in the summer of 1998, a young man named Michael Winters vanished without a trace. No footprints, no evidence. Not even a single thread of his clothing was ever found. And yet, people still claim they hear him calling for help. Michael was 26 years old. He lived in a small apartment complex on the outskirts of town. By all accounts, he was ordinary. He worked at a hardware store, played guitar, spent weekends fishing with friends. There was nothing unusual about him. But the night he disappeared, neighbors reported hearing something strange, sounds that would haunt them for years to come. It was a hot July evening. Michael returned home after his shift at work. His car was parked neatly in its usual space, his lights turned on. A few hours later, one neighbor heard a loud crash, followed by muffled shouting. They thought it was an argument,
But when they listened closely, the shouting didn't sound like two people. It sounded like one voice, crying out for help from somewhere inside Michael's apartment. When police entered the unit the next day, they found his front door locked, the windows sealed from the inside. His guitar leaned against the wall, half a beer sat unfinished on the counter, the TV was still on. But Michael was gone. At first, investigators assumed he had walked away voluntarily, but every detail contradicted that. His wallet, his shoes, and his keys were still in the apartment. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle, no fingerprints that didn't belong. His friends insisted he had no reason to run. And yet, he had simply vanished. As detectives combed the apartment, they found something odd. In the bedroom, the carpet was torn near the bed frame. Underneath, scratched deep into the wooden floor, were words. Just 3, etched unevenly, as if written in a rush. "Help me here." Neighbors were interviewed again. Several admitted they had heard Michael's voice that night, but what unsettled them most was where the voice seemed to come from. Not the apartment, not the hallway, but from the walls themselves. One man swore he heard Michael's voice shouting from inside his own bathroom pipes. Another neighbor claimed they heard pounding in their ceiling all night, as though someone was trapped in the crawlspace. Police searched every inch of the building, the attic, the basement, every crawlspace and duct. Nothing. No body, no sign of Michael, no explanation. Weeks passed. The case grew colder. But then, the reports began. Tenants started hearing knocking at odd hours. Sometimes it came from the walls, sometimes from beneath the floor, and sometimes it seemed to answer back. One tenant claimed that when she knocked 3 times against her bedroom wall, she immediately heard 3 knocks back. Others described hearing a faint voice whispering their names as they fell asleep. A few swore the voice was Michael's. By September, more than half the residents had moved out. The building gained a reputation. New tenants rarely lasted more than a month, but for those who stayed, the experiences grew darker. One man reported hearing heavy footsteps pacing in his living room at night, though the apartment was empty. Another claimed he woke up to find words scrawled on his bathroom mirror in steam. "Still here." Then came the most disturbing piece of evidence. A woman who lived directly beneath Michael's old unit began hearing faint sounds of crying from her vent. She placed a recorder inside the duct overnight. When she played it back the next morning, the recording captured hours of static. But at exactly 3:17 a.m., a voice broke through. It was faint, distorted, but unmistakable. A man's voice, and he said just one thing: "Don't let me disappear." The recording was turned over to investigators, but no official report was ever released. The police quietly closed the case. They listed Michael Winters as missing, presumed dead. But even now, more than 20 years later, no body has ever been found. The building itself has been renovated, painted over, and rebranded with a new name. But tenants still report the same disturbances: knocking in the walls, voices in the vents, footsteps in locked rooms. And some claim that on hot summer nights, they still hear the sound of Michael's voice, echoing faintly, begging for help, from a place no one can reach. Disappearance leaves behind questions, but in this case, the question was never where Michael went. It was what took him, and why his voice has never left.
If walls could speak, that house would never stop screaming. Families fled. Investigators turned away. And yet, it still stands, waiting for the next person bold enough, or foolish enough, to step inside. But what would you do If you heard the whispers calling your name in the dead of night, would you run or would you listen? Tell me in the comments below. And if you think you can handle more stories like this one, subscribe, because the next case we uncover may just be darker than anything you've ever imagined.